Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us for this meditation and mindfulness session from the Freer and Sackler, Smithsonian's National Museum of Asian Art. My name is Grace Murray, and I'm happy to welcome you today. For those of you who may be new, today is one of our Friday art-based meditation sessions, which includes inspiration from an artwork in the museum collection. So we're lucky to have today Emma Stein joining us. Emma is Assistant Curator for South and Southeast Asian Art at the museum. She's going to be introducing us to today's focused artwork, which I think you'll really enjoy. After Emma's introduction, then we will move into the meditation session led by Aparna Sadananda. And then at the end, Emma will be back with us to answer your questions and have some conversation about the artwork. So now I'll turn it over to Emma to begin.
Thanks so much, Grace. Hi, everyone. As we begin this very brief talk, I want to use the first minute to take you to Bali. So just let your eyes adjust to this photograph. We're standing on the banks of a river. You might imagine the sound of the water kind of bubbling over the rocks. And notice that on the right side of the picture, there are caves that have been excavated from the living rock. This is a site that was probably built around the 11th century, so about 1,000 years ago. And it was used by ascetics, by practitioners of Hinduism who sought retreat from the busyness of urban life and went into the jungle for more solitary forms of meditation and practice. So as you keep this image in mind, we'll look at the object from our collection today. Now you can probably see already why I took you first to that jungle hermitage. This is a painting that was made in the 19th century in Bali, Indonesia. It's a traditional form of painting called kamasan painting, which uses a very limited palette of colors. So all you see is red, orange for this skin tone, black, a little bit of green and grays. The black itself is made from soot, and all of these pigments are natural. But it shows us a scene of two figures on the banks of a river. Down here at the bottom is a river, in a kind of jungle hermitage, just like we just saw. They're sitting beneath these very lush trees, and they occupy a sort of liminal space between the earthly and the transcendent. You might notice that there's a difference in hierarchy of status between the two figures. So both of them are female, but the one on the left is kneeling, right? Both of her feet are tucked under her. And she's holding out her hands. If we look closely, we can see that her hands are filled with something. They might be flower blossoms. There's some kind of an offering which she's giving to the other figure. And her eyes are completely enraptured in what she's seeing. Then the other figure, who she's looking at, is a little bit higher up, so that indicates a kind of status. And she's seated with one leg crossed and the other foot almost dangling into the river. She's in a kind of yogic pose here, and she's seated on a textile mat. These indications that, and the supplicant has come to her and is making offerings under the tree. This painting doesn't give us a whole lot to go on in the way of iconography. It's difficult to identify the goddess herself, unlike other Indian and Southeast Asian artworks that we've looked at together. Some of you may remember that the iconography is very specific to what they hold in their hands or what posture they make with their body. That tells us who we're looking at. There isn't much here, but she may be, given that she's in this kind of forested jungle setting, She may be a goddess associated with agriculture, the rice goddess, Devi Shri, who's very, very popular in Indonesia and specifically in Bali. So we have the supplicant who's come to her making offerings, perhaps for fertility, perhaps for a good year, on the banks of the river in the jungle hermitage. And one aspect that really fascinates me about this painting are notice these tiny decorative elements that hover in the air between the two figures. These are very stylized flower blossoms, and they have a whole history in Indonesian art that I love to see. On the relief carvings of Borobudur, the largest and most important Buddhist monument in all of Indonesia, there are flower blossoms that you see falling around the figure of the Buddha. And then later, about 1,000 years later, when this painting was made, we find that these flower blossoms have kind of taken on a life of their own, and they've become less recognizable as blossoms, but instead they become this kind of transition moment, this element that hovers on the surface of the picture plane, somewhere between the divine and the real. With that, I'll turn it over to Aparna for the meditation. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. Thank you so much for taking us on that very quick journey to Bali in Indonesia. It's so important that this gives us a sense of travel in times that travel restrictions still apply, and for good reasons. Thank you so much. And as we start the meditation for this week, I must share that I'm inspired by the events of the week, the way I saw women represented in the inauguration, and also the fact that today we have an artwork that is about two women figures in there. It brings to my mind the very powerful words of Amanda Gorman in her poem, The Hill We Climbed, which I will share how it brings us to the theme of our meditation today. So I would like to recite a few words from her powerful poem, The Hill We Climb. Somehow, we weathered and witnessed a nation that isn't broken, simply unfinished. And yes, we are far from polished, far from pristine. But that does not mean we are striving to form a union that is perfect. We are striving to forge our union with purpose. Now let me go on to share how I think this artwork for me brought out the theme of finding and being the highest version of ourselves. So let me start by sharing the screen so we can look at this beautiful opaque watercolor painting on cotton. And this is a little, I think, a smaller painting in terms of dimensions, about 10 inches by about 11 inches from Indonesia, Bali. And we will practice the art of looking closely, examining the details of this artwork as we go along in this meditation. So if you prefer to engage with this artwork on your own, you can always open up a new window from the link that Yining has just shared, and you can just be with it on your own. But if you'd like to come along in this practice, I invite you to first settle down in a way that you can be comfortable where you are, just as you are. So feel free to adjust your device screens, feel free to adjust your posture. And then when we find that posture of stillness, we could close our eyes, or lower the gaze. And attune to the presence we hold in the space we're meditating from. We could honor that space, that presence, with a few deep breaths, inhaling through the nose exhaling through the mouth. Today, in this art of centering our attention, let's use the breath as our tool to bring our awareness to specific points along the body. So let's start by bringing attention to the feet and imagining that we're breathing into the feet. Maybe 3 to 5 breaths with our attention centered at the feet. Now slowly shift your attention to the shins, calves, the knees, and the thighs. The hips and the feet. The lower back, the upper back, the shoulders, chest and the waist, the arms, the hands, the neck, the face, the head. Now the entire body. Take a few breaths, really breathing into the presence that this body holds in space and time. In each of these breaths, we're affirming to the self, I'm here now. And sometimes this process of embodying the self can remind us of aspects of tension or the need to take up more space through the body, need to take deeper breaths perhaps. So let's offer everything we can to the mind and the body so we can set up a space which is conducive to relaxation and yet being aware. We're giving ourselves that permission to settle down. And then shift our attention by gazing at the painting in the screen. So let's start by noticing the colors in this painting. And as Emma mentioned, notice all of the colors to form a limited palette, the form of vermilion red, yellow, sort of olive shades of green, browns, the black in the border, as well as the black forming the outlines. And the speckles of creamish tones of white in the border. And perhaps you might have also noticed how the colors in the natural elements, the aspects of this painting that set up the ambience of where the scene is, are also reflected in the colors on the two figures in terms of their clothes, jewelry, any other adornments. Subtle hint to the harmony between the people and their environment at this time. And at any time, the eyes or the body want to take a moment to like relax, you can always find inspiration in the wavy lines representing the flow of the river water at the bottom of the painting, and invite ourselves to deep inhales through the nose and deep exhales through the mouth, perhaps. And now let's spend a few moments taking a closer look at the clothes and the jewelry of each of the two figures. We'll begin with this figure on the left side. Noticing the different ornaments that she's wearing. Noticing the drape of the fabric around her. And when that is complete, we can now pay attention to the same details on this other figure, which is perhaps the goddess Devi Shri. And we might find it interesting to notice that the representation of these two figures in terms of their attire or the ornaments is so similar. Perhaps they're wearing the same jewelry. Like there is a quality of mirroring of the devotee and the goddess. But then we find that it is their body language that is different. Like the figure on the left is kneeling down. Her eyes, her gaze is lowered, and her palms are extending out and offering. Overall, her body language representing this quality of humility and devotion. And on the other side, this figure here, we can feel that the figure is in an exalted position based on her body posture, the crossing of one leg over the other, sitting up on a rock, and gazing down at the devotee and the offering besides the river. for a moment, feel free to find a mirroring of these two body postures and see how it feels. What are the qualities that you can experience when you take a bow forward, just so that we can empathize with the two figures in this painting. Feel free to just mirror their body language and see what are the qualities that arise. What is it that you witness? And whenever that feels complete, you could come back to your posture of stillness and notice that perhaps the artist who painted this is offering a subtle hint as to how the distinction between the disciple or the devotee and the goddess is not in terms of anything external, but in terms of the energy that the goddess embodies. Like this offering is a commitment of this individual self towards a higher version of itself. And now, when we zoom out a bit and look at all the movement conveyed through this painting in the form of the floating leaves and flowers, in the movement of the fabric, the drapes around these two figures, also in the movement of the leaves and the flowers on the trees of the lush jungle, the movement of the creepers around the trees. All of this giving a sense of the charged nature of the atmosphere where the individual self is finding a glimpse of the higher version of itself. You may also be able to appreciate the contrast of this light-filled space with that of the frame in black, like a moment of light, radiance, piercing through the darkness like a star-studded sky, perhaps. Now we'll go on to practice a few moments of contemplation where we can meditate on finding the highest, perhaps the best version of ourselves. Feel free to close your eyes. Let your whole body relax. Let the body take up support. And let's imagine the mind to be like a vast sky where each thought takes on the form of a cloud. When we meditate on the mind, it's quite natural for the mind to magnetize to a thought. But in all of these moments, we could remind ourselves that this thought is just a single cloud and that we always have a choice to focus on the space of the mind, on the sky behind the clouds. And then, although there may be lots of thoughts in the mind, a lot of clouds in the sky right now, Let us choose to focus our attention to the space between the thoughts, the space of the sky between the clouds. So each time the mind jumps onto a thought or a train of thoughts, and we recognize that, we can come back to that space between the thoughts. The longer we hold our attention there, we might have a sense of this empty space, this empty canvas of the mind unfolding, a space of true silence, a space where we can experience the quietness despite the presence of all these thoughts. The fibers of the mind relax. Let all of this relaxation translate to the mind and the body, becoming more receptive to the voice of the spirit, to the voice of the narrative of the universe through our lives. You could also visualize all the goodness of the universe rushing into this body and through this body to the mind. All of that light elevating the vibration of the self. You can always complement the awareness of the goodness of the universe rushing into this body with words of loving kindness to the self. And as we allow our vibration to be elevated in this way, may this elevate our thoughts, our intentions, which will eventually translate into our thoughts, into our words and actions. May this energy, may this energy transform every negative experience into an empowering experience. May this energy inspire us to embrace change and creativity as we work towards rebuilding. And maybe take a moment here to visualize what this higher version of ourselves would look like. What are the qualities that this version of ourselves would embody? We offer all that we can to this higher version of ourselves. May this energy attract more people, more forces of the universe that represent the version of ourselves that we would want to be. Together, let all of us find the best version of humanity that we could all embody collectively. Breathing in, we're here now. Breathing out, we're together. Whenever the practice feels complete, close our practice by joining palms in prayer, acknowledging the light within each one of us with a silent namaste. While also acknowledging the self within namaste, honoring the teacher within us for holding the space for our mind and body. We also offer a namaste to the artist or artists who might have painted this, providing their creative energy as the source of our inspiration in this meditation. The light in me honors the light in you. And thank you all so very much for sharing your presence, time, energy, and attention with me in the last few minutes. Namaste. Take care.
Thank you so much, Aparna. That was beautiful. And there are so many wonderful questions in the chat. I really enjoy looking at an artwork with this many people's eyes because we just see so many things when we look all together. There were some questions about some visual details in the painting, particularly about the figure of the devotee or the supplicant. And I'm just wondering if you could speak to that. Someone asked about the lines right in front of the woman on the left, the lines sort of coming out of her eye, the black lines near her eyes, and then also the difference in skin color between the two figures. I think that's interesting. And also the sort of flame-like object that is below the hands of the devotee.
Yeah, sure. So the difference in skin color shows, again, this difference in hierarchy or difference in sort of ontological status of being of the two, that one of them is human and one is divine. The gods are typically this kind of orange color in skin, but sometimes they can be greenish, sometimes more reddish. I wouldn't read too much into the specific choice of color for the skin, but again, it's just a subtle way to show a distinction between these two otherwise very similar looking female figures. As Aparna pointed out, they're wearing the same jewelry, they're wearing very similar garments, they're both dressed in this kind of courtly divine mode, but the skin again shows a difference between them. Now, I think what's happening with these lines that someone asked about, and then also this element right here, is that we're getting a kind of confusion between foreground and background. So you'll notice that the flower blossoms also have these kind of black lines around them. You can think of it as like a divine breeze that's being represented here. And anything that's happening in the foreground really is along this brown embankment beside the river. So the two figures are in the foreground. They are the closest to us. And then everything that we're seeing is sort of surrounding them or behind them as a landscape element. So, for example, this flame-like element, it does look that way, is, I believe it's like a hillock in the distance. And this is just foliage that's growing on it, the same way we see the use of orange to show these kind of vines that are growing around the tree and leaves that are coming off of it. So there's an idealization that's happening here in the landscape. I showed you the picture of the cave temples on the banks of a river to give a sense of the real world setting that we're seeing represented here, and the way that Balinese artists did turn to the landscape around them as inspiration. But then there's a stylization, an enhancement, an idealization that takes it beyond the realm of the mundane or of the worldly and gives it this kind of divine element as well. So I think that the lines also here are sort of part of this background divine wind, but we could also read it as vision, as her vision, radiating out and looking at the goddess before her.
Another person asked in the chat about the shape of the flower blossoms, and I think that relates to what you were saying about the sort of stylization of these natural elements. But they were just wondering what do you think the original or the actual natural flower that this is based on might look like?
Okay, I read that question as like, what was the earlier representation, since I talked about that transformation. So I pulled up a quick picture for you from Borobudur. You can see my mouse. So these are the flower blossoms from the early 9th century. And you can see how they're just sort of hovering in the air. Like there's a Buddha inside of a palace in this representation. But the flower blossoms just dot the surface, and they're not grounded in any sense of space. Are they close to us? Are they far away? Are they just hovering as this kind of, again, like divine sort of ambiance for the setting? As for the actual flowers, I mean, there are plenty of flowers in Bali. I don't know exactly which flowers these are.
Thank you. No, thank you for that reference. It's beautiful to be compared to Borobudur. Another question that came in is, do we know anything about the artist who created this work? And particularly, might it have been a male or female painter?
Okay, so the expression, it takes a village. In this case, it really does take a village. These are group efforts. They're collaborative. They're not painted by a single individual, and therefore we don't know very much about the artists themselves, but there are kind of lineages and families of artists in specific villages throughout Bali that create different styles of painting. So I mentioned the style of painting that this is known as kamasan, which can also just be known as traditional Balinese painting, but there's a specific village called kamasan as well. So the artisans may or may not have come from there. That term has become more of an umbrella term for different styles of Balinese painting, but this wouldn't have been created by a single artist.
Thank you. Linda asks, could you say anything about the black that is behind the figures?
Sure, that's their hair. They have long hair that's coming down in these wavy curls down their back, and you can see that both on the top of their head, because they're wearing not crowns that cover their head, but they're wearing kind of like tiaras that sit atop their head. And you would see this in a traditional Balinese dancer's costume as well. Would be the same kind of headdress that comes around their head like a tiara, but then the hair is there underneath, and then it's flowing down the back of both of the women. Fascinating.
And Jenny asks, could the textile that the goddess is sitting on actually be her dress or part of her costume?
I don't think so. She's wearing this green sarong here that you see wrapped around her waist, and then she has this upper body garment that kind of fans out almost like a tail, which you see also in the other one. But her lower body garment would be, a sort of fairly tight-fitting sarong that she has wrapped, and then it's just draping down a little bit. And I say probably not as well because you often see divine figures or ascetic figures or yogis or yoginis seated in natural settings on a textile. It may be an animal skin. That would be the other possibility rather than like a printed or woven cotton textile. I wouldn't feel comfortable to come down firmly on whether or not this is an animal skin or a textile because I don't think we have enough detail to go on here, but that brown color makes abstraction of an animal hide.
And is the border actually also painted?
It's cloth, and I don't believe that it's original to the painting. The painting is on cotton, and then, yeah, it's been mounted against this probably much later. Yeah, if we were going to show this, well, I hope to show it at some point in the museum. I would probably want to cover the border because it doesn't really have anything to do with the painting itself.
And how old is the piece?
It was painted around 1800. It's from sometime in the 19th century, but probably fairly early on.
Yeah. There also was one question about where could someone find out more information about this painting? Do you want to say anything, Emma, about the Southeast Asian art resources on our website?
Sure. So on our main website under collections areas, you'll find Southeast Asia has all of our Southeast Asian collection available, categorized by material. So since we mostly have sculptures and ceramics, sculptures made of stone or bronze, and ceramics, this painting you'll find under the category of other materials. This is the only Southeast Asian painting we have in the collection, so it's quite a unique object. But you'll find a little bit more information about just sort of brief descriptions and a little bit more content for everything in the Southeast Asia collection there.
Well, thank you so much for sharing those thoughts with us, Emma. We really appreciate you being with us.
My pleasure. Thank all of you.
I appreciate Anne's comment that she says that she could feel the women's power coming through with grace during this session. Very nice to hear. And thank you for coming. I'll turn it over to Aparna just to conclude for today.
Thank you so much for coming with us in this trip to Bali through this beautiful painting with women protagonists. And we hope that you enjoyed this offering of art-inspired meditation. If you have any suggestions or questions for us, please do let us know. And we will be back again on Monday with yet another meditation. And then we'll also have meditations on Wednesday and Friday. So thank you so much. And we hope to see you again next week. Take care. Namaste.